Good morning.
Good morning.
I will be reading two stories from Philip Gulley. This is called The Front Porch Classroom. When I was in the 4th grade, I was offered a job as a paper boy. It didn't pay much money, but I knew having a job would build my character, so I took it. Good character being important to 4th graders. My lesson started on the first day on the job. A customer paying his bill asked me if I wanted a tip, and I said, "Sure." He said, "Stay away from wild women." One of my customers was a lady named Mrs. Stanley. She was a widow and not prone to wild living, so I took to lingering on her front porch during my rounds. She'd watch for me to come down the street, and by the time I pedaled up to her house, there'd be a slushy bottle of Coke waiting for me. I'd sit and drink while she talked. That was our understanding. I drank, she talked. The widow Stanley talked mostly about her dead husband, Roger. "Roger and I went grocery shopping this morning over to the IGA," she'd say. The first time she said that, the Coke went up my nose. That was back in the days when Coke going up your nose wasn't a crime, just a mite uncomfortable. Went home and told my father about Mrs. Stanley and how she talked as if Mr. Stanley were still alive. Dad said she was probably lonely and that maybe I should just sit and listen and nod my head and smile, and maybe she'd work it out of her system. So that's what I did. I figured this was where the character building came into play. Turned out Dad was right. After a few summers, she seemed content to leave her husband over at the South Cemetery. Nowadays, we'd send Mrs. Stanley to a psychiatrist, but all she had back then was a front porch rocker and her paper boy's ear, which turned out to be quite enough. I quit my paper route after her healing, moved on to the lucrative business of lawn mowing. Didn't see the widow Stanley for several years. And then we crossed paths up at the Christian Church's annual fundraising dinner. She was standing behind the steam table, spooning out mashed potatoes and looking radiant. 4 years before, she'd had to bribe her paper boy with a Coke to have someone to talk with. Now, she had friends brimming over. Her husband was gone, but her life went on. She had her community and was luminous with love. Community is a beautiful thing. Sometimes it even heals us and makes us better than we would otherwise be. I live in the city now. My front porch is a concrete slab, and my paper boy is a lady named Edna with 3 kids and a 12-year-old Honda. Every day she asks me how I'm doing. When I don't say fine, she sticks around long enough to find out why. She's such a nice lady that sometimes I act as if I have a problem, just so she'll tarry. She's lived in the city all her life, but she knows about community too. Community isn't so much a locale as it is a state of mind. You find it whenever folks ask how you're doing, because if they care, and not because they're getting paid to inquire. 2,000 years ago, a church elder named Peter wrote the recipe for community. "Above all else," he wrote, "hold unfailing your love for one another, since love covers a multitude of sins." 1 Peter chapter 4, verse 8. That means when you love a person, you occasionally have to turn a blind eye to their shortcomings. Kind of like what my dad told me about the widow Stanley. Sometimes it's better to nod your head and smile. Psychiatrists call that enabling denial, but back when I delivered papers, we called it compassion. The next story is called Expectation. Was over visiting my folks one autumn morning. and Ray stopped by to borrow Dad's car. Dad and Ray became friends when Dad served on the town board and met Ray, who worked for the sewer department. Ray's one of those eminently useful men it pays to know if you need something done. From getting a raccoon out of your attic, to nosing out the most likely spots for morel mushrooms, to setting off the town fireworks on July 4th. In a specialist world, Ray's a generalist, which inclines me to think well of him. The problem today is that too many folks know a lot about a thing or two, but not enough folks know a little about a lot of things. If you don't believe that, just try to find a doctor who will mend your feet and your nose in the same visit. Ray started working for the town when he graduated from high school. College was out of the question, it costing money, and Ray not having any. Instead, he married his high school sweetheart. They settled into a small house outside of town and slipped into the lifestyle Ray had come from. Work, raise your kids, hope they turn out right, and pray to Jesus that Social Security is still around when you retire. And every now and then, lie awake at night, frustrated that your kids can't have the same things the doctor's children have. Ray and his wife had a firstborn daughter who hit school like a cyclone, made straight A's, which startled the teachers, she being Ray's daughter. It wasn't that Ray lacked enthusiasm for learning. He just wasn't one to let school get in the way of his education. His interests lay elsewhere. I'm that way myself. Took me to 8th grade to figure out that algebra wasn't a line of Playtex undergarments. Ray's daughter kept up her grades, out-hustled the doctor's kid to become the class valedictorian. But the halls of Harvard don't overflow with sewer worker offspring, so she was trying to get used to the idea of a career in fast food. Then a college in Ohio, scouting around for smart kids with gumption, offered her a free education, and her dream of being a psychologist drew closer. So she went to Ohio, and Ray, whose truck kicks up a fuss when driven past the county line, borrows my dad's car once a month to go visit his daughter, of whom he's fiercely proud. There's a heap of people pulling for that young lady. Lots of folks who stopped Ray on the street to ask how she's doing. When she went to Ohio, she carried a passel of expectation with her. If she fails, the entire town will lose its will to live. Other than that, I don't think she's under much pressure. Some people would crumble under her heavy weight of expectation, but what would crush others seems only to enliven her. What I'm betting on is that 10 years from now, she'll be charging a doctor's kid $200 a session to help him get his head on straight. He'll moan about how his parents expected too much, and she'll tell him to grow up and get a life. In a therapeutic way, of course, and with appropriate sensitivity. Then the next time she sees her dear old parents, she'll give them a hug and whisper, "Thanks for believing in me." She's learning early on what takes most of us a lifetime to uncover, that expectation is a blessing, not a curse. It's a beautiful thing when people expect something decent of you. Excuse me. It means you've given them reason for confidence. Like when John the Baptist was born and his father sang a beautiful song about all the things his boy would do. Then his boy went out and did them. Many a powerful life has its start in expectation.